It's been a couple years since that video was shot. Tell us what is Start Out up to these days?
Well, first of all, thanks a lot for having me again. It's been quite a while, yeah. So what I've been up to, well, we just intensified our services, especially since the beginning of the pandemic. A tremendous need for entrepreneurial resources. And we're excited to provide our services more than ever to our LGBTQ entrepreneurs.
You have a lot of different programs that you offer to support LGBTQ entrepreneurs. You have an online virtual community, you have an accelerator program, you have a mentor match program. What are you working on now that you're most excited about?
There's two things I'm most excited about. The first one is actually how well our entrepreneurs have been doing in spite of all the challenges. They're just so inspiring and exciting to see. The second piece I'm super excited about is the launch of the Startup Pride Economic Impact Index. What it does is it measures contributions of our entrepreneurs to society, and just as importantly, maybe even more excitingly, what they could be with equal access to resources. So what we're basically measuring is the unrealized potential of entrepreneurs to their communities.
So people want to learn more about the economic index. You actually and your team are going to be available throughout the summit in our virtual resource expo, where people can learn more about that index. If folks want to learn more about Start Out outside of the expo, if they're watching this video maybe later, where can we learn more about what you're up to?
Thanks for the question. Yeah, it's all live, freely accessible at startout.org/SPEII, which again stands for the Startup Pride Economic Impact Index. We'd love to have you there.
Adres, thanks for your leadership, and thanks for being part of the ESHIP Summit community.
Thank you for yours and your teams. Great pleasure to be here.
So I think if you want to be an entrepreneur, you have to iterate, and we're iterating on our digital connection. But if you want to learn more about Start Out, you can, as Adres mentioned, head up to the top into the Resource Expo, and you'll be able to check out more about what the Start Out team is doing. Up next, I want to bring Melissa back, and you all are getting a little bit of a preview of who our guest is going to be. He is one of America's most iconic entrepreneurs. He's got a really strong track record of predicting the future, the internet, and he was an internet pioneer before there were internet pioneers. He made sure that you got mail, and he also sent you a nonstop supply of AOL CDs. He doesn't need an introduction, but let's watch a short video to get into this next segment, also to check our VCRs and make sure they're working, and we'll come back with Steve Case in just a second. Let's watch this video.
We're really bothered by the fact that an overwhelming amount of venture capital and attention goes to a relatively small number of entrepreneurs in a relatively small number of places. We want to make sure every entrepreneur everywhere in the country, if they have an idea, they really have a shot at turning that into a startup and really a shot at the American dream. Last year in this country, 75% of venture capital went to 3 states: California, New York, Massachusetts. 75%. The other 47 states fought over the remaining 25%. This challenge around leveling the playing field is not just around place, so that's super important. It's also around people. Last year in this country, over 90% of venture capital went to men, less than 10% to women. Less than 1% of venture capital went to African Americans. And that's obviously not right, but it's also not smart. We need to make sure we're backing everybody everywhere, and that's what motivates us to hit the road. We believe the rest will rise. We really do. We have no idea which cities will rise the fastest. And the reason we don't know is it has nothing to do with what we do and everything to do with what you do.
Steve, you have spent the last few decades championing entrepreneurs, and I would imagine that your bus is in quarantine these days. But first of all, welcome to the ESHIP Summit. And yeah, Steve, welcome. I met you over 10 years ago when you were talking about the importance of entrepreneurship, and I was doing entrepreneurial support and ecosystem building work in Iowa. So I know that you spend a lot of time helping entrepreneurs and investing in them. What's your sense of entrepreneurs, how they're faring today in 2020?
First of all, good to see you, Ann. Y'all, it's great to be with Kaufman. And going back 10 years, I think what you're referencing is when we launched the Startup America partnership at the White House, and the key partner with the Case Foundation was the Kaufman Foundation. And we worked together on a number of things, including the Jobs Act, and more recently when we launched Rise the Rest, 5 or 6 years ago. The answer to your question, again, Kaufman has done great research on this, is it's a mixed bag. There's some people in some places that are doing pretty well, and despite the pandemic, in some cases, actually, they're seeing an acceleration in their businesses, which is great. But there are many people in many places, probably most people in most places, that are really struggling as entrepreneurs, and this pandemic has created even more intense pressures. So my hope is what's going to happen coming out of this is not just trying to get back to some sense of normal, but try to create a better normal, a new normal, because the reality is pre-pandemic, it really wasn't working for a lot of people in a lot of places. So having a more inclusive approach to innovation, entrepreneurship, backing more people in more places, I think is going to be the only path forward. Hopefully, this is a little bit of a wake-up call. I remember Warren Buffett saying once that you can only tell who's swimming naked when the tide goes out. Well, in some ways, the tide's gone out in the last few months, and I think it's basically we're now seeing some challenges we have in our economy, and some of them people talk about a lot around things like income inequality, which is a real issue. I think we also have to have more focus on opportunity inequality, which is also a major issue.
Melissa Bradley back in here. What I love is that you're zooming in to our virtual location today, and we're having a chat. But I bet you're actually connecting from a couple blocks away. Melissa's just down the street from your office in D.C. She's over at Georgetown. Melissa, I know you know Steve. Let's dig into this a little more. I want to talk about looking forward. What are we seeing? What are the opportunities? Kind of what do we as leaders need to be thinking about? And love to hear both of your perspectives. But Melissa, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I think the challenge is that leaders at this point in time, to what many of our guests have said, is pivot. I think the beauty is that most entrepreneurs, that is innate in who they are. And I think it's been one of the reasons why so many people have survived. I don't know if they're thriving, but they've survived. And so I do think it's important that, as we've heard throughout the day, that we start to think outside the box and also across lines that have probably been falsely created, and think about how we can come together and start new ecosystems between the entrepreneurs and economic development. How do we leverage Zoom to make some of those partnership connections that we probably didn't have before? We're now working with people in Kentucky and other places that physically we thought that was a barrier, but now with Zoom, for better or for worse, it has really opened up some gates. So I think from an entrepreneurial perspective, it's exciting new market opportunities. It is, amazing new partnerships in supply chain. And unfortunately, as a woman and a person of color, we're still cash strapped. And so I think that is a big challenge, but there's ways around that. And I'm hopeful that we make some changes. But I think for me as an entrepreneur and my peers, this is just another day at the office with some hurdles to climb, and we're going to figure it out.
Steve, tell us a little bit about, you've been looking at trends. You've been looking at as a venture capitalist, where the future is headed. What you said in a recent interview I saw on cable news was that you said some of these trends are being accelerated through the COVID-19. Give us just one or two of those trends that you're seeing that are accelerating, that interest you as an investor, but also could help communities outside of sort of the traditional entrepreneurial hubs as they're thinking about what's ahead.
Well, there's a handful that really were trends that were bubbling, starting to get more momentum, and have really accelerated, kind of hit a tipping point because of the pandemic, including a lot in healthcare, which does play into the rise of the rest notion. Some of the most significant kind of research universities in the country are in the middle of the country, not just on the coast. And looking for innovation in healthcare is going to be a key part of that. One particular aspect that we've seen with one of our companies is in the telehealth area. People have been talking about telehealth for 20 years. It showed really strong progress 6 months ago, when suddenly people couldn't go to the doctors. Doctors had to embrace telehealth. Patients had to embrace telehealth, and you've seen a great acceleration. Of course, we've also seen a big acceleration in e-commerce. It's been growing steadily over the last 20 years. It's jumped dramatically over the last 6 months. So those are two examples of industries that have really taken off. There's some others that I think are worth watching, including what happens in terms of offices with remote work. I think as we move back into a mode where some people at least are working in offices, other people continue to be remote. How do you bridge that, get more of a hybrid workforce? I think that's going to be a challenge. And the other thing which really ties in with the Rise to Rest thesis is you're seeing this firsthand, and a lot of people who have been living in places like San Francisco, New York, Boston, other places have left in the last few months. They're sheltering in place someplace else. And when things settle back down, maybe most of them go back to where they were. Some will, I think, decide to stay where they are and still work for their existing company. But some will decide to stay there and be part of the startup ecosystem in those cities. So we've long talked about how there's been a brain drain in the last several decades of people leaving places like the heartland to go to the coast because that's where the opportunity was, that's where the venture capital money is. I think we can now start to see an acceleration of the boomerang of people returning, which will help these rising cities rise even faster.
Melissa, you're investing too. Go ahead.
I just had a question there. And where does capital come in, right? I think some of the sectors you mentioned are amazing, and we're starting to see a lot of entrepreneurs come up in that space. But some of those are slightly more expensive than, selling a product out of your backyard. And so I'm curious, you were again first with Rise to the Rest and getting both people and money into their hands. What are you seeing in some of the capital trends to be able to fuel these entrepreneurs who might have been overlooked before?
Well, it's a fair point. Depending on the sector you're focused on, if it's a more complicated technological integration, more complicated systems integration, more complicated dealing with partners, more complicated dealing with regulatory issues, policy issues, it will require more perseverance, and often that will require more capital. And part of the challenge, as we all know, is it has been harder for most people in most places to raise the capital that they need, which is why so many people have felt like they had to go to a place like Silicon Valley. So we hopefully can reverse that and get more capital in the hands of more entrepreneurs. I think there are more venture capitalists on the coast starting to look at opportunities in other places. There are more angel networks rising up in different cities. There are regional venture firms that are starting to start up or scale to the next level. So we're starting to see some early signs of capital spreading more broadly, but there's still a lot of work to be done. And I don't think it's going to happen overnight. We didn't get here overnight. We're not going to get out of this overnight, but at least hopefully this pandemic is a wake-up call that we need to do better, and we need to have a more inclusive approach to growth, more inclusive approach to jobs, not have a country where some people in some places are doing really well, but a lot of people in a lot of places are being left behind, are worried and anxious about the future. This is a moment we have to deal with the pandemic. We have to deal with the health crisis. We have to deal with some of the related crises around jobs and more recently, sadly, around race. But we have to not just look at them as problems to solve, but also opportunities to seize, so we come out as even stronger as a country, and more communities all around the country really are rising and showing momentum and possibility, as opposed to being thought of as flyover cities or Rust Belt cities or kind of cities of the past. They have the opportunity in this third wave of the internet to be cities of the future, building the companies of the future and the industries of the future.
You've been traveling around the country, obviously pre-COVID on a bus, talking to community leaders. So if you were talking to someone who was a community leader, an economic developer, a university president, a mayor, a governor, I mean, what are you telling them what do they need to do in this moment and to do more to support the rise of the rest, the entrepreneurial support in the ecosystems of their community? What's just a couple easy things that you remind them about, or that you think they really need to keep top of mind?
Number one is to recognize that startups are the big job creators, new companies. That small business is important, big business, Fortune 500 is important, but the net job creation, this again goes back to the Kaufman research, really comes from new companies, under 5 years startups. So your economic development policy really should be centered around creating new companies, not just supporting existing companies. That's number one. And even Congress did a lot of things with PPP and other things to support existing companies, stabilize them, and which was important, but needs to focus more on how do you launch new companies. Second is culture. You have to create a culture around risk-taking, a sense of a possibility, not just be skeptical and cynical, but understand that entrepreneurship requires a leap of faith. And the third one I mentioned is collaboration. We've seen this in all the different cities we visited. The cities that are rising fastest are working together more collaboratively. And as you say, it's the entrepreneurs working with the larger companies, working with the mayor, working with the university, working with the accelerator, really trying to drive more collaboration, which is critical. There's a African proverb I love: you want to go quickly, you can go alone, but you want to go far, you must go together. So collaboration is something that has to be front and center to any kind of regional strategy to support startups.
So I'm going to let you take us out, whether it's a question or if you want to wrap us up here.
Yeah, no, I would love to just ask one last question, and that is, what are some of the things that you're thinking about that you can share? But obviously, we look to you as a leader, as a spokesperson for the entrepreneurship community. What are some of the things that are on your mind? Because my sense is you're probably thinking some things that other folks are thinking that may feel far out and crazy, and you may help normalize some of that or find some allies.
Well, I think it goes back to some of the sectors we talked about, which I think need to be disrupted. Healthcare, obviously, 1/6 of our economy doesn't work very well. Outcomes aren't great. It's not very convenient. It's too expensive. So looking at ways to innovate in a sector like that is critical. And there are many other sectors in our economy, important aspects of our lives, learning, food, et cetera, that need more attention. But adopting this mindset, this understanding that the roadmap, the playbook, if you will, that worked so well in the last 20 years when it was about software and apps and smartphones and so forth, is not going to work in this third way, where it requires more systems integration, requires more partnership, requires more engagement on policy. So leaning into that, recognizing that is where we're going, I think is got to be a critical part of this. So the other one is to continue to work around leveling the playing field. I think we've made a little bit of progress, not as much as we'd like, but a little bit of progress in terms of educating people around the rise of rest, educating people about the 75% of capital going to 3 states and trying to get more capital going to more places. But we need to do a much better job in terms of people and be much more inclusive. As I mentioned in the video earlier, last year, even though 50% of this country is women, only 10% of venture capital went to women. 14% of the population is Black, less than 1% goes to Black entrepreneurs. So obviously, we're not doing a good job in terms of leveling the playing field, creating more opportunity, thus creating more jobs, just creating more economic growth in more places in terms of regions of the country, and we're not doing a great job in terms of people. So we'll continue to push ahead on the place side and try to figure out other ways to lean in on the people side, so we really can hopefully help usher in a new age of American entrepreneurship, lead the way in this third way, but do it in a much more inclusive way, so more people in more places have reasons to be optimistic about the future and be enthusiastic about technology and disruption, as opposed to worried about the future and worried about even being more left behind. And we can't allow that to happen. So hopefully this is a wake-up moment, and we can shift from just managing through the pandemic crisis to imagining a new and better world, including a new and better entrepreneurial world.
Wow, Steve, that's fantastic. Listen, I know you're active on Twitter, and so just for the last question, in a tweet, what is giving you hope in this moment? Like where are you finding hope? What is giving you hope in a tweet?
America was a startup 250 years ago, is now a leader of the pack. We've always figured out a way to reinvent ourselves, to pivot, and we can do it again.
Thread, but thank you so much, Steve, for taking the time to join us today. You have been an important part of the ESHIP Summit since day one. Melissa Bradley, you have been fantastic in helping us keep the conversation going. If we want to learn more about the work that Steve's doing, you can look up Rise of the Rest. Melissa Bradley, 1863 Ventures. We'll share some of that in the chat. Actually, if I could crowdsource that, could someone find Steve's Twitter, Steve's webpage, Rise of the Rest? Melissa's put that in the chat for us. Thank you so much for coming and for your leadership and joining us today in this conversation. It's about time for us to wrap up this session.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Kaufman. And thank you all, everybody, for tuning in. We all have to do our part.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we're going to wrap up this session because we're going to be moving into some small group activities. I want to ask you one question in the chat before we roll into the directions for the campfires. Is that you heard from Steve? What's given? What is the future? What do you think the role of leaders is in this moment? I mean, as you're thinking about all you heard today, what is the role? What is our role as leaders? What is your role as leaders? Put that in the chat, and we'll revisit some of that a little bit later. One of our key production partners here at the ESHIP Summit is the Value Web. They are a global network of expert facilitators and scribes. If you've been to the live event, you know who they are. They're the ones that make the pretty pictures and capture all the knowledge. They've helped us since day one, and they help organizations design interactive events that surface collective knowledge. So we've got the team at Value Web with us today. We're going to be doing some activities later that are interactive, right? So we're going to move into the campfire sessions, right? And so the Campfire Sessions, which are going to follow this, will have some interactive opportunities. But we also have some interactive opportunities that you can see. Let me see if I can use my green screen right. Oh, there we go. That we've got two scribes with us. Alicia and Brandon are actually scribing all of these talks that you're hearing, and you can, we'll revisit, we'll check in with them a little bit throughout the event to see how that's coming along. So you can also see that. You can check in on that at any time. Up in the Fun menu, it says Live Illustrations. And we'll revisit those illustrations as they come to life and they emerge to this event. All right, last poll, and then we're going to head to our campfires, or head to a break to get a bite, and then we're going to head to our campfires. But I want to do one more poll. You heard it from Steve, his answer. What is giving you hope in this moment? So in one word, in the last poll for this session, what is giving you hope in this moment? If you could give us a response there. We're going to actually revisit the answers to that in the campfires. So the campfires are coming up next. Campfires are small group conversations designed to create a shared space for people to meet and connect over a shared interest, just like a real campfire minus the campfire. So to navigate and to join your campfires, we hope that you join us after the break. You need to navigate to the full summit agenda. You need to click into the campfire agenda item, and then you need to navigate to the box that corresponds to your last name. You will then be placed in a group in a randomized way with people from around the country and around the globe who are joining us. And one more thing. As we get into these small group conversations where immense value will be created, but is really the heart of the ESHIP Summit, is these interactive small group conversations. One more thing. Normally we'd wear a name tag if we were in an in-person event. Well, your name tag, don't forget, in this event is actually your Zoom name, or the name that's kind of the lower third of your screen. So could you adjust your Zoom name to include your first, last name, your pronouns, and the community you represent? It's going to be really helpful when you're in conversations with each other. And if you need help with that, you can go to the live help desk up there, and they can send you some directions on how to do that. The campfires are going to begin at 1:15 U.S. Central Time. It's 1:15 U.S. Central Time, and then we'll see you back for the next plenary, where we will have a roundtable discussion around what is entrepreneurial ecosystem and what is an ecosystem builder. And then we're going to see a real live example of what ecosystem building looks like in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I'll send you off again with a video produced locally that was submitted from Birmingham. It is actually a visit of the Rise of the Rest bus to Birmingham. We'll send you off with that video, and then we'll see you in the campfire sessions very shortly. Grab a bite, take a drink of water, and then join us. Come meet some folks from around the globe, and then we'll see you back at 2:30 p.m. U.S. Central Time for the next plenary, where we're going to dig into what is entrepreneurial ecosystem building. I'm so happy that you joined us today. Thank you for spending the time, and I look forward to seeing you in a little bit.
It's not like a costume you wear. This entrepreneur thing is like, it's in here. Like, if you're really doing it, it's a part of you. It's like almost spiritual, I feel like, because we're thinking about it all the time.
Well, I'm not going to say it's easy. It's going to take a lot of determination. It's going to take a lot of late nights, early mornings.
The startup is hard. I think you have to be willing to fail. You have to be willing to take a risk. But overall, the end reward is you built it.
Our culture, in fact, worldwide culture, is shifting toward entrepreneurialism. So people are realizing that there's an opportunity for anybody to innovate. And we in Birmingham have to take part of that revolution in order to participate in the future economy. And we are.
It is a city on the rise, particularly when you think about the startup ecosystem itself. It's one here where Birmingham has all of the core ingredients that you need for a successful startup ecosystem.
You can have technology anywhere. I don't have to be in New York to run a fashion company. I don't have to be in Silicon Valley to have a tech company. I can do it right here in Birmingham, Alabama, and really have the scalability to grow and make an impact across the nation.
We're at that point now with technology. We have to embrace it, and we have to, make it a part of the city as a whole. It's, I don't think that there's a way around it.
When I think about what Birmingham is doing for startups, tech startups of any sort, you can see the city growing.
If you're willing to work and you want to succeed, the city gets behind you and the city supports you.
You're not just another number walking in and out of a building. You're a person with a name, with a company, with a purpose. That's what you get here.
And it gives us a footstool where we can actually set that own foundation for ourselves, no matter who you are.
I've seen people in Birmingham, leave their large companies and start something based on an idea they have and have an impact on their community through those startups.
I think we live in a different time and a different place where people want to spend 40 years on a job. They're creative. They want to try something on their own, and it kind of gives them a kind of a gut feeling that so-and-so can do it, from where they came from, I know I can do it. So it's just an awesome feeling.
And as an entrepreneur, having somebody to hold your hand as you walk through it, I mean, trust me, you gotta hustle, but having that guiding light while you go is invaluable, and that's what you get in a city like Birmingham.
I'm Gary York, CEO of Help Lightning.
Zebby Carney, I'm the owner of Eugene's Hot Chicken.
I'm Marquita Hall, I'm CEO of Shiny Solar.
I'm Thomas Walker, and I am the CEO and co-founder of Swervis.
My name is Warren Wills, and I am the co-founder and president of Swervis.
I'm Baker Heppenstall Tapas, and I work on partnerships.
Josh German, the CEO and co-founder of O3 Solution.
I am Ashley Ammons. I am the co-founder of Mixtros and the COO of Mixtros.
I am Carrie Schrader. I am the mama of Mixtros. This is my daughter. I'm the CEO.